The worn rubber wheels of the cleaning cart made no sound on the polished marble floor. They were old, but Elias kept them oiled. Everything he owned was like that, old, cared for, and quiet. His gray work shirt was frayed at the cuffs but clean. His hands, calloused from years of holding mops and wrenches, moved with a steady, unhurried grace as he polished a vast steel panel that mirrored the lobby back at him in a long, distorted gleam. He worked with the singular focus of a man who had made peace with his station, a man whose dignity was not for sale and therefore could not be diminished. He was not sad. He was resilient. A few feet away, on a low leather bench that was worth more than his car, sat his world. Maya, all of 6 years old, was bent over a drawing pad, her small brow furrowed in concentration. Her pink jacket was a splash of defiant warmth in the cold, sterile expanse of the Vance Innovations headquarters. The sitter had cancelled, a fever, and Elias couldn't afford to miss the shift. So Maya was with him, a quiet, portable piece of his heart nestled in the belly of the corporate beast. The silence was shattered. The plate glass doors hissed open and Eleanor Vance swept in like a storm front. Dressed in a suit the color of a thundercloud, her heels clicked like pellets of ice on the marble. A phone was fused to her ear, and her voice, though low, was sharp enough to cut glass. "That is not an explanation. It's an excuse," she said, her words echoing in the hollow, cathedral-like space. She didn't look at the security guard who nodded at her, nor at the janitor polishing the wall. She was a being of pure, forward momentum. I don't pay a team of senior engineers for excuses. I pay them for solutions. You have until 5 p.m. to find one, or you can find a new place to work. Unacceptable. Fix it. The final 2 words cracked like a whip. The sound, amplified by the lobby's brutalist acoustics, shot across the floor. Maya flinched as if struck. A box of crayons, perched precariously on the edge of the bench, tipped and scattered across the gleaming floor. The sudden, sharp clatter of dozens of colorful sticks breaking the pristine silence was the final assault. Maya's face, a perfect mirror of her father's quiet intensity, crumpled. A breath hitched in her small chest, followed by a raw, startled cry that was shockingly loud in the vast emptiness. Elias moved instantly. He didn't speak, didn't look toward the source of the disruption. His entire universe contracted to the small, weeping figure of his daughter. He knelt before her in a single, fluid motion, his body creating a shield, a temporary wall between her and the cold, judging world. Her sobs were frantic, fueled by surprise and overstimulation. His hands, large and rough, moved with an engineer's precision and a father's gentleness. He picked up a fallen blue crayon. From a small, worn leather pouch on his belt, a pouch filled with odd bits of metal, screws, and fuses, he retrieved a small steel spur gear. The teeth were perfectly machined. He held it out to her. Her crying hitched, her curiosity snagged by the unexpected offering. He showed her how the crayon's hexagonal body fit perfectly into the negative space at the gear's center. A key and a lock. Then, placing the gear flat on the marble, he used his forefinger to slowly rotate it. The crayon, locked in place, began to spin, its wax tip drawing a faint, silent blue circle on the floor. A soft, rhythmic, whirring sound filled the space around them, a miniature engine humming just for her. It was a tangible puzzle, a mechanical whisper that cut through her panic. Her sobs subsided, replaced by a watery sniffle. He offered her the gear. She took it, her small fingers tracing the cool, precise teeth. He handed her a red crayon from the floor. She looked at him, a question in her wide, dark eyes. He nodded gently. She carefully fitted the red crayon into the gear's heart, and, mimicking him, spun it on the floor. A red circle appeared next to the blue one. A tiny smile ghosted across her lips. The crisis was over. Solved not with words of comfort, but with the silent, grounding logic of how things fit together. Eleanor Vance had ended her call, the final, dismissive click echoing her departure. She had turned to leave, her mind already 10 steps ahead, calculating the cost of incompetence and the strategy for her next meeting. But the sound of a child's cry had snagged her. Now, from across the lobby, she stood frozen, a statue in a storm-gray suit. She had witnessed the entire, silent exchange. She watched this man, this janitor, instinctively pivot from his menial task to perform an act of profound, intuitive grace. He hadn't coddled. He hadn't shushed. He had diagnosed the problem, sensory overload, and provided a solution, focus, pattern, and quiet, mechanical purpose. It was an act of emotional engineering. A sharp, involuntary breath hitched in her own chest. Her hand, which a moment ago had been gripping her phone like a weapon, came up to her mouth. She was not impressed, she was fundamentally shaken. This quiet man in the worn gray shirt possessed a type of power she had never witnessed before. It wasn't the power to command or control. It was the power to heal a small, broken moment with nothing but a gear and a gentle, unwavering focus. It was a power that made her own feel brittle and hollow. She watched as he helped Maya gather the rest of the crayons, his movements patient and methodical. Then, against every instinct that told her to keep moving, to ignore the inconvenient flicker of humanity in her path, she began to walk toward them. Her heels clicked on the marble, each step a declaration of her authority clashing with a bewildering new curiosity. Elias looked up as her expensive shoes came to a stop just inches from Maya's scattered drawings. His face was calm, his eyes steady but guarded. He had seen her type before. They saw right through men like him. But when she spoke, her voice was not the ice-cold instrument of command it had been moments before. It was strained, uncertain. "I need a consultant," she said, the words feeling foreign in her own mouth. "For on-site diagnostics. Special projects," she gestured vaguely upward. "There's an office. On the 40th floor. Be there tomorrow at 8 It was an order, phrased like a job offer. Elias looked from her severe, unreadable face down to Maya, who was now trying to fit a green crayon into a gear that was clearly too small. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "But I have my work here." He wasn't looking for a handout, or a promotion. He was looking after his daughter. Eleanor's composure faltered. His refusal was more disorienting than the initial scene. People like him were supposed to be grateful, eager. "This is not a request," she stated, her old authority returning, but it felt like a costume she was struggling to keep on. "I'll double what you make now." "Triple it," she glanced at Maya, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Your daughter can come with you. There's an empty office next to mine. Until you arrange something." She needed to understand this anomaly. She needed that quiet, steady competence closer. It was an impulse she couldn't explain and didn't trust, but for the first time in years, she followed it. The 40th floor was a world of silent, pressurized air. The walls were glass, the desks were gleaming planes of white, and the floors were a dark, polished wood that seemed to absorb all sound. Elias was given a small, sterile office next to Eleanor's, a glass box within a glass tower. His official title was Special Projects Consultant, a name so vague it was meaningless. His task, as Eleanor had explained it in a clipped, impersonal email, was to observe and optimize operational efficiency. He didn't open a laptop. He didn't ask for reports. He walked. He spent the first few days walking the floors of Vance Innovations, his old, soft-soled work boots a stark contrast to the staccato click of designer heels. He was a ghost in the machine, a janitor with a new title, and most employees looked right through him. But Elias saw everything they missed. He stood in the server room for an hour, not looking at the blinking lights, but listening. He traced a low, persistent hum, a vibration that drove the IT staff to distraction and headaches, to a single, unsecured cooling conduit in the subfloor. He spent 20 minutes cushioning it with high-density foam from a packing crate. The hum vanished. The IT manager stared at him, bewildered. "How did you?" Elias just nodded and walked away. He saw the receptionists at the front desk squinting every afternoon as the sun hit the west-facing windows. The automated blinds were programmed to lower at 4 p.m., but the glare became unbearable by 2:30. He found the environmental control panel in a service closet and reprogrammed the schedule. The next day, the blinds lowered on their new schedule. The receptionist felt the relief without ever knowing its source. He was fixing the building, but what he was truly doing was tending to the people within it. He was easing the small, constant frictions that wore people down, the problems that weren't important enough for a work order but accumulated into a sense of institutional disregard. It was during his first week that he met Garrett Vance. Garrett, Eleanor's cousin and the company's COO, materialized in the hallway outside Elias's office. He was dressed in a suit so sharp it looked like it could draw blood, his smile a predatory slash of white. He leaned against the doorframe, looking Elias up and down with unconcealed disdain. "So you're the mystery project," Garrett drawled, his eyes cataloging Elias's simple clothes. "Eleanor's new pet. Tell me, what kind of diagnostics does a janitor perform? Checking for dust bunnies under the desks?" Elias was oiling the hinge on his office door, which had a faint squeak. He finished his task, wiping the excess oil with a clean rag before turning to face Garrett. He didn't rise to the bait. His silence was a calm, gray rock against which Garrett's arrogance crashed. "I listen," Elias said simply. Garrett let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You listen? Incredible. A true visionary." He pushed off the doorframe, his smirk tightening. "Stay out of my way, handyman. Whatever game you're playing with my cousin, it ends when I say it does." Just then, Eleanor's door opened. She stood there, her presence instantly changing the temperature in the hallway. "Is there a problem, Garrett?" she asked, her voice flat. "No problem at all, cousin," Garrett said, his tone shifting to one of slick congeniality. "Just welcoming our newest asset." He shot Elias a final, dismissive look before striding down the hall. Eleanor's eyes lingered on Elias. "You're not what I expected," she said. It was a test, a subtext-heavy probe into his motives. Elias simply met her gaze. "Most people don't expect much," he replied. It wasn't a complaint, just a statement of fact. He turned back to his work, leaving her standing in the charged silence, the gulf between her world and his both vast and, somehow, shrinking. Night fell on the city, turning the glass walls of Vance Innovations into dark mirrors that reflected the sterile, empty offices. Most of the 40th floor was deserted, but a few lights still burned. Elias was working late, a habit from his old job that he hadn't shaken. He was supposed to be running a final diagnostic on the climate control system, but he had finished an hour ago. Maya was asleep on a small couch in his office, curled under his worn jacket, her soft breathing the only sound. He walked the silent halls, a sense of custodial responsibility lingering in his bones. He passed the main R&D laboratory, a glass-walled room where the company's future was being forged. A single, massive smart whiteboard was illuminated at the far end of the room. On it was a complex schematic, a three-dimensional rendering of the company's flagship project, the new VX-9 micropropulsion system. It was a project plagued by a fatal flaw, a persistent, catastrophic overheating issue that had stumped Eleanor's best and brightest for 6 months. Elias stopped in the doorway, drawn in by the familiar language of design. He saw the problem instantly. The coolant channels were too linear, the heat sinks too conventional. They were trying to brute force a problem that required elegance. He stepped into the lab, the door hissing shut behind him, convinced he was the last person in the building. He walked to the whiteboard. For a moment, he just stared at the flawed design, a ghost of his former self stirring within him. He saw Sarah's face in his mind, her teasing smile as she'd look over his shoulder at his own designs. "Too much muscle, Eli," she'd say. "Think like water, not like a hammer." His hand reached out and picked up a digital stylus from the tray. The tool felt alien and yet perfectly familiar. His fingers, so accustomed to the heft of a wrench, moved with a forgotten grace across the smooth glass surface. In a small, empty corner of the schematic, he began to draw. He didn't sketch a new system, just a single component, the heat sink. His design was a biomimetic spiral, an intricate, flowing structure modeled on the interior chambers of a nautilus shell. It was a design that maximized surface area while promoting a natural, vertical flow for the coolant. It was simple. It was elegant. It would work. He drew for no more than 90 seconds. A lifetime of expertise poured through his fingertips onto the glowing screen. And as soon as it was finished, a wave of something cold and sharp, grief, or perhaps fear, washed over him. This was not his world anymore. This was a language he had sworn to forget. With a swift, reflexive motion, he dragged his sleeve across the corner of the screen, erasing the sketch. He set the stylus down, the click echoing in the silent room. A shadow of pain crossed his face before the calm, placid mask slid back into place. He turned and left the lab, the ghost of his genius fading from the screen. He didn't see Eleanor standing in the darkened hallway, just around the corner. She, too, had been working late, pacing the floors to outrun the demons of an impending quarterly report. She had seen the light on in the R&D lab and had gone to investigate, assuming an engineer had stayed behind. She saw Elias step inside. She watched, hidden in the shadows, as he picked up the stylus. She saw the change in his posture, the way his hand moved with an authority and confidence that was utterly at odds with the quiet handyman she knew. She saw him sketch the spiral, a design so fluid and intuitive it was more like art than engineering. And she saw him erase it. She saw the flicker of profound loss on his face before he turned away. After he was gone, she stepped into the lab, her heart hammering against her ribs. She walked to the whiteboard, her reflection a pale ghost on its dark surface. She stared at the corner where he had drawn, where a faint digital residue of his design still lingered. With trembling fingers, she tapped the screen, pulling up the board's cached history. There it was. The spiral heat sink. The solution. The elegant, beautiful solution her team of 6 PhDs and their $100 million budget had failed to find. Her breath caught in her throat. This man didn't just fix leaky faucets and humming conduits. He wasn't just a kind father. He was a master. A genius in self-imposed exile. And in that moment, her curiosity about him transformed into a deep, earth-shaking awe. Eleanor's office was her fortress. A vast, minimalist space with a panoramic view of the city she had conquered. It was a room designed to intimidate, to project an aura of untouchable power. But today, the fortress had been breached. She was on a video call with the board of a company she was acquiring, her voice a calm, lethal weapon as she dismantled their arguments one by one. She was in her element, a queen upon her throne. She was so focused that she didn't hear the soft footsteps behind her. Maya wandered in from Elias's office next door. He had stepped away for a moment to check on a system on another floor, leaving Maya with her coloring book. But the book had been forgotten. In her small hand, she clutched a new piece of art. She walked right up to Eleanor's massive desk and stood there, waiting patiently. Eleanor, sensing a presence, glanced down. Annoyance flickered across her face. "Not now," she mouthed, waving a dismissive hand. She turned back to the screen. "The valuation is non-negotiable." Maya was not deterred. She reached up on her tiptoes and placed the drawing gently on the desk, directly in Eleanor's line of sight. It was a child's drawing, rendered in bold, waxy crayon. It depicted 2 figures. One was a tall man with a friendly smile, holding what was clearly a wrench. The other was a woman in a pointy black dress, a child's interpretation of a power suit, standing alone inside a tall, transparent box. The woman in the box had a crown, but her mouth was a flat line, and underneath her wide eyes Maya had drawn 2 big, sad blue circles. Eleanor's voice faltered mid-sentence. She stared at the drawing. At the glass box. At the sad blue circles. Maya pointed a small finger at the crayon version of Eleanor. Her voice was not accusatory, simply observational. It was a truth bomb, delivered with the devastating innocence of a child. "You have sad eyes," she said. The words landed in the silent, sterile office with the force of a physical blow. They bypassed every defense, every wall, every layer of armor Eleanor had spent a lifetime constructing. They went straight to the small, lonely girl who still lived inside her, the one who had learned to equate success with solitude. I have to call you back," Eleanor managed to say to the screen, abruptly ending the call. The faces of the board members vanished. She was alone with the child and the drawing. She looked from the crayon woman in the glass box to the real child standing before her. No one, not her father, not her mentors, not her lovers, had ever seen her so clearly. A single, hot tear escaped and tracked a silent path down her cheek. It felt like a betrayal, this raw, uncontrolled emotion. Ashamed, she quickly wiped it away. But Maya saw it. The little girl's face softened with a look of profound, simple empathy. She reached out her small hand, not to Eleanor's arm or her shoulder, but to the hand that rested on the desk, the one that was clenched into a tight fist. She gently patted it, her touch feather-light and unquestioning. The simple, non-judgmental comfort was Eleanor's undoing. Another tear followed the first. The bridge between their worlds was no longer one of professional curiosity, or even intellectual respect. It was now built of a child's drawing and a moment of shared, unguarded humanity. Eleanor Vance, the queen in the glass tower, had just been seen. Truly seen, for the very first time. Rain lashed against the windows of Elias's small apartment, blurring the city lights into a watercolor wash. The storm had rolled in without warning, a perfect metaphor for the evening. Eleanor had only meant to drop off a personnel file for Elias to sign, something she could have sent via courier, but she had used it as an excuse. An excuse to see his world. She'd been caught in the downpour running from her car to his building and now stood dripping on the worn welcome mat inside his door, completely out of her element. His apartment was the antithesis of her own penthouse. It was small, cluttered, and alive. The air smelled of rain, wet wool, and a faint, lingering scent of cinnamon. The furniture was old, wooden, and mismatched, every surface softened by use. Bookshelves overflowed, and the walls were covered not with abstract art, but with framed photographs and Maya's colorful drawings. It was not a space designed to impress. It was a space designed to be lived in. It was warm. It was safe. While Elias made tea, her eyes were drawn to a photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a woman with a brilliant, infectious smile and eyes that danced with light. She was laughing, her head thrown back in joy. "My wife, Sarah," Elias said, his voice quiet from the kitchen. He came back with 2 steaming mugs and handed one to her. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, a small spark of physical contact that felt momentous in the quiet room. Eleanor couldn't tear her eyes from the photo. "She's beautiful." "She was," he said, the simple correction hanging in the air. He stood beside her, looking at the picture, but seeing a memory. "She was an architect. She saw the world in lines and light. Said I saw it in systems and stress points." A sad smile touched his lips. "We were a good team." The unspoken question hung between them. Eleanor finally asked it, her voice barely a whisper. "What happened?" Elias took a slow sip of his tea, his gaze distant. "A car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. She was gone instantly." He spoke without melodrama, a flat recitation of a fact that had cleaved his life in two. "I was a lead design engineer back then. At Aerospec Dynamics. Long hours, high pressure. After she was gone, I looked at my life. I looked at that career path, and then I looked at Maya. She was just a baby." He turned to look at Eleanor, his eyes clear and direct. "It wasn't a choice. Not really. I couldn't be the father she needed and the engineer they demanded. So I left. Took jobs that let me be home when she got out of school. Jobs that nobody noticed." He set his mug down, his hands resting on the back of a worn armchair. He looked vulnerable, stripped of the quiet stoicism he usually wore like armor. "Sometimes," he confessed, the word barely audible over the drumming rain, "I'm scared. Scared that I'm not enough for her. That I'm letting Sarah down by giving her this small life." His raw, unvarnished confession created a space in the room, an opening. His vulnerability was an invitation. Eleanor looked from his pained face to the warm, loving chaos of his home. A home, not just a residence. She thought of her own penthouse, a silent, sterile gallery of her success. My father, she began, the words feeling rusty from disuse, believed love was a line item on a balance sheet. Affection was a performance bonus. She traced the rim of her warm mug, not looking at him. I got good grades, I got a pat on the head. I won a scholarship, he took me to dinner. When I started my company, he invested, not because he believed in me, but because he believed in the ROI. She finally lifted her eyes to his. I built this entire empire to prove that I didn't need his conditional approval. I walled off my heart because every time I showed it, it was treated as a liability. A weakness to be managed. A humorless laugh escaped her. I succeeded. And I ended up just like him. Her voice broke on the last word. I'm scared, she confessed, echoing his own words, that I don't know how to be anything else. The rain beat against the glass. The storm outside, the storm inside. He didn't say anything. He simply reached out and placed his hand gently on her arm. His touch was firm, steady. An anchor in the tempest. In that quiet room, surrounded by the ghosts of his past and the architecture of her pain, they stopped being a CEO and a consultant. They were just two people, sharing the stories of their scars. Garrett Vance moved through the corporate world like a shark, sensing blood in the water. The blood was the growing, inexplicable bond between his cousin and the janitor. It was a threat to his position, to the established order. If he couldn't find a weakness in Elias, he would create one. He started by digging, but Elias's record was clean. He'd left a top-tier engineering firm with glowing recommendations, citing only family reasons, so Garrett pivoted from research to invention. He acquired a piece of Vance Innovations' own restricted technology, a high-definition micro-camera, no larger than the tip of a ballpoint pen, encased in a sleek, executive stylus. Spy tech. He waited for his moment. It came during a high-level strategy meeting in Eleanor's office. Eleanor, Elias, and Garrett were present. Garrett, feigning collegiality, placed the pen on Eleanor's desk, near her laptop. A gift, he'd said. New prototype from R&D. Later, after the meeting, Elias lingered. He was tidying up, a force of habit, when his eyes fell on the pen. It was elegant and inert. But something was wrong. His innate technical intuition, the part of him that saw the world in systems and energy flows, felt a subtle dissonance. He leaned closer. There was a faint, almost imperceptible heat radiating from it, a heat a simple stylus should not produce. He saw a microscopic power draw indicator, a pinprick of light so small it was designed to be invisible. He picked it up just as Eleanor walked back in. Ma'am, he said, his tone serious. This pen. I think it's a recording device. Garrett, who had been hovering in the doorway, chose that moment to enter. He let out a loud, theatrical laugh. My God, Eleanor, are you hearing this? Our janitor is now a security expert? He used condescending amusement. He's paranoid. What, do you think I planted it? That I'm spying on you? He framed the accusation as so ridiculous, so outlandish, that to even consider it was to validate the ramblings of an unstable underling. Eleanor looked from Elias's serious face to Garrett's mocking one. She was caught, for a moment, in the crossfire between her old world and her new one. Garrett pressed his advantage. He went straight to the board. Eleanor's new consultant is unstable, he reported, his voice laced with false concern. He's making wild accusations, displaying extreme paranoia. It's a risk to the company's image. Then he delivered the killing blow. I did some digging. He didn't leave Aerospec for family reasons. He was let go. Cited for emotional instability following his wife's death. It was a vicious lie, expertly twisted from a sliver of truth. To seal Elias's fate, Garrett made an anonymous call. He spoke to a case worker at Child Protective Services, painting a picture of a young girl, Maya, living with a volatile, paranoid father who was having delusions about spy cameras at his new, high-pressure job. He used Elias's quiet dignity as evidence of his withdrawal, his love for his daughter as a sign of possessiveness. He created a primal threat, aiming not at Elias's job, but at his very soul, his daughter. The call from the board came first. It was a summons. Eleanor stood before a panel of grim-faced men and women in the main boardroom, Garrett standing slightly behind them, the picture of sober concern. "Eleanor, this has gone too far," said the chairman, an old ally of her father's. "This man, this Elias, is a liability. His bizarre accusations, this CPS investigation. It reflects poorly on your judgment, and on the company. You need to terminate his contract. Immediately. Before this becomes a public relations nightmare." Garrett's smirk was almost imperceptible, a slight tightening at the corner of his mouth. He had won. He had successfully framed the narrative. Elias was the unstable janitor, and Eleanor was the foolish CEO who had been charmed by him. Eleanor looked at their faces, hard, pragmatic, concerned only with stock prices and public image. She saw the world she had fought so hard to conquer. Then, in her mind's eye, she saw Maya's drawing of the woman in the glass box. She saw Elias's face in the rain-streaked light of his apartment, his confession of fear laid bare. She had to make a choice. Not between a good employee and a bad one, but between the sterile, hollow fortress she had built and the fragile, authentic home he had shown her was possible. Her spine straightened. The ice returned to her voice, but this time it was not a weapon of indiscriminate destruction. It was a finely honed blade with a single target. "No," she said. The word dropped into the silent room like a stone. "Elias stays." She turned her gaze directly onto her cousin. "Garrett, you are suspended, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation into corporate espionage. Security will escort you from the building." The room erupted. Garrett sputtered, his face a mask of shocked fury. But Eleanor's decision was absolute. She was no longer playing their game. She was protecting her own. An hour later, she was at Elias's apartment. The door opened to reveal a man she had never seen before. The quiet resilience was gone, replaced by a raw, hollowed-out terror. A CPS agent had just left. "They came," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "They interviewed Maya. They asked her if she felt safe. They asked her if I acted strange." He ran a hand through his hair, his whole body trembling. "They're threatening to take her from me, Eleanor." On his word. The name, Eleanor, was a plea. He was no longer her employee. He was a man whose world was about to be shattered. She stepped inside and put a firm hand on his shoulder. His eyes met hers, wide with panic. "We will fight this," she said, her voice a low, fierce promise. Together. In that moment, she ceased to be his boss. She was his ally. His partner. She pulled out her phone and called her personal lawyer, the most ruthless litigator in the city. The board wanted to protect the company. Eleanor Vance was going to protect her family. The battle lines were drawn. The emergency board meeting was Garrett's gambit, a power play backed by his family's shares and his carefully sewn narrative of chaos. He was there with his lawyer, radiating an aura of wrong confidence. He demanded his immediate reinstatement and the termination of Elias, whose paranoid delusions had led to the humiliating CPS investigation, an investigation, he noted grimly, that was still officially open. Eleanor began, her voice calm and measured in the tense, wood-paneled room. "Garrett has accused Elias of paranoia for claiming this pen was a surveillance device," she said, placing the sleek, silver pen on the center of the massive mahogany table. It looked innocent, innocuous. "He has suggested Elias is unstable, a danger to this company and to his own child." Garrett nodded gravely. "A tragic situation, but one we must contain. Let's see," Eleanor said softly. She nodded to Elias, who stood near the head of the table. Elias stepped forward. He was not dressed as a consultant or a janitor, but simply as himself, in a clean, dark sweater and jeans. He looked directly at the board, his expression serious but calm. He placed a small, custom-built device next to the pen on the table. He'd constructed it overnight in the R&D lab, using parts from a dozen different systems. He flicked a switch. A nearby monitor, which had been displaying the Vance Innovations logo, flickered to life. It now showed a crystal clear, wide-angle view of the entire boardroom, as seen from the pen's perspective. A collective gasp went through the room. Garrett's face went pale. "But simple recording is a crude tool," Elias said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. He turned to a laptop connected to the monitor. "Every wireless device has a unique digital signature, a fingerprint. And this particular device has been streaming its data, encrypted, to a specific off-site server for the past 3 weeks." With a few keystrokes, he brought up the server's access logs on the main screen. A string of dates and times appeared, followed by an IP address. "This is the address that has been accessing the recordings," Elias explained. He ran a trace. The result flashed on the screen in stark, white letters, mapping a direct line to a residential address. Garrett Vance's home address. "He wasn't just watching you, Eleanor," Elias said, turning to her. "He was listening to product strategy meetings. He was recording proprietary data." He typed another command. A new window opened, displaying fragmented data packets he had managed to recover and decrypt. On the screen, for the entire board to see, were the schematics for the VX-9 micropropulsion system, the very design he had secretly fixed. They were attached to an email draft, addressed to a shell account owned by their largest competitor. Garrett was exposed. A liar, a fraud, and a corporate spy. His face contorted in a snarl of pure hatred as 2 security guards moved quietly to his side. He was finished. After he was gone, a stunned silence filled the room. Eleanor stood up, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her board members. "For years, this company has prized profit above all else," she said, her voice resonating with a new, profound clarity. "My focus has been on balance sheets, on acquisitions, on an unforgiving definition of strength. I was wrong." She looked toward Elias, who stood quietly by the screen, his work done. "The greatest asset to walk into this building in the last year wasn't a new technology, or a corporate acquisition. It was a man the world had taught itself to overlook. His value wasn't on a resume. It was in his integrity. In his observation. In his character." She took a deep breath. "That will be the new metric of this company. People first. Integrity always. That is the future of Vance Innovations." She finished speaking, and her eyes found Elias's across the room. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of respect and support. In front of the silent, watching board, Eleanor walked away from the head of the table. She walked directly to Elias. Without a word, she reached out and took his hand. Their fingers laced together, a simple, public gesture that was more powerful than any speech. It was a silent declaration of a new alliance. A new foundation. The fallout was swift and decisive. Garrett Vance was fired, his nameplate stripped from his office door before he'd even posted bail. He faced a litany of federal charges for corporate espionage. Armed with the irrefutable proof of his deception, Eleanor's legal team had the CPS case against Elias dismissed with a formal, written apology from the agency. The storm had broken. That evening, the city lights glittered below like a fallen constellation. Eleanor found Elias on the rooftop terrace of the Vance building, a private garden space she rarely used. The air was cool and clean after the day's turmoil. He was standing at the edge, looking out not at the empire she commanded, but at the quiet, sprawling neighborhoods beyond. She came to stand beside him, the silence between them comfortable, familiar. "You saw me," she said finally, her voice soft, stripped of all its corporate armor. "In my glass box. When no one else ever bothered to look." He turned to face her, the city lights catching in his dark, steady eyes. "You saw me too," he replied. "Not the janitor. Not the consultant. Just me." The space that had once separated their worlds, a chasm of class, power, and pain, had vanished. There was nothing left between them but truth. He lifted his hand, the one that could diagnose an engine by its hum, and gently cupped her cheek. His touch was warm, grounding. She leaned into it, a quiet surrender, closing her eyes for a brief moment. When she opened them again, he was still looking at her with an expression of such profound tenderness that it made her heart ache with a beautiful, unfamiliar fullness. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of fiery passion or desperate relief. It was a kiss of homecoming. It was quiet, deep, and certain. It was the peaceful, cathartic resolution to a war they had both been fighting alone for years. It was the feeling of a lock finding its key. It was a promise, sealed in the stillness of the night, high above the sleeping city. 9 months later, the sun shone with a gentle, hopeful warmth. The scene was not a boardroom or a sterile penthouse, but a sprawling community garden tucked away in a revitalized city block. The air smelled of freshly turned earth and blooming lavender. Elias, Eleanor, and Maya were on their knees in the dirt, a happy, cohesive unit. Elias, in a faded t-shirt and jeans, showed Maya how to gently place a young sunflower seedling into the soil. Eleanor, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, and wearing a plain linen dress with streaks of dirt on it, laughed as Maya patted the soil down with a little too much enthusiasm. They looked like any other family on a bright Saturday afternoon, their easy affection a stark, beautiful contrast to the cold marble lobby where they had first collided. At a respectful distance, a small local news crew filmed the scene. A simple wooden sign at the garden's entrance read, "The Sarah Spark Foundation. Planting seeds for the future." It was their joint venture, a philanthropic mission born from their united stories. The foundation, funded by a significant portion of Vance Innovations' profits, was creating STEM education programs, mentorships, and hands-on engineering workshops for underprivileged children across the city. It was the perfect synthesis of his suppressed genius and her redefined power, a shared purpose that was healing them both. Maya, finished with her planting, jumped up and ran to wrap her arms around Elias's neck, then immediately turned and threw her other arm around Eleanor, pulling them into a tight, three-person hug. Over the top of their daughter's head, Elias met Eleanor's eyes. His gaze was full of a love that was as steady and deep as the earth beneath them. "We built this," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Eleanor placed her hand over his on Maya's back, her own eyes shining. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. "No," she replied, her voice filled with a peaceful joy she had once believed impossible. "We grew it." They were not a merger or an acquisition. They were a family, rooted in the rich soil of kindness, integrity, and quiet, unwavering truth. Where are you watching from? From a bustling city or a quiet town, we hope this story found you well. If this story of love, healing, and quiet strength touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales that celebrate the human spirit. Your comments are a source of great encouragement, so please let us know what this story meant to you. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop looking for the genius in the unexpected.